Welcome back, everyone. I am the Honest Mechanic, and I've been waiting 91 days and 12 hours to be precise on this particular project. If you guys remember, I was talking about my good old Subaru here, my Forester 2009. That's knocking. It's not doing well. The engine is going to have to come out because I promised you guys that I would come down and figure out what the cause of this was. I did do a couple of videos on this vehicle before. So this one here in particular, it's going to be a couple of parts. First part, I'm going to show you guys exactly what needs to be done, step by step, how to pull the motor out of this frame. Keep watching. Okay, first things first. We're going to take off the intake assembly. That's pretty easy. But before we can do anything else, always disconnect your battery. Right now I got my battery on charge because this thing has been dead for 3 months now. But I'm going to disconnect all of that. I'm going to remove this intake tube, and including the ram air up here with the belt guard. Okay, so after removing the intake duct, the mass airflow sensor needs to be disconnected before we go and do all that first. But there's going to be a bolt here, obviously, and a bolt on the top. And then there's a couple of hoses too that need to be undone. So this one over here, and then you're going to want to pull this one straight out like this. You can leave the sensor connected to this one. And then there's one right down below here. Pull that one straight out. And if there's any question, I highly recommend either getting colored zip ties or getting a paint marker, something to make a mark on these hoses. Then you can go, let's say, A to A, and then B to B, whatever system works best for you. If you're not familiar, if you've never done this before. Now, the other thing that needs to come out, doesn't really need to come out, but it just gives you more room, is the actual filter box. And of course, that's going to have a bolt down below. And then remove the nut right over here. And we'll carry on with the next step. So next we're going to remove the vacuum line here. We're going to remove it from the engine side, just like that. Put it aside like this. Followed by the computer module. This is just a clip that pulls up. Or at least it should. Might have to put the camera down. Yep. I'm gonna have to put the camera down for that. But we're gonna disconnect this guy like right here. That should just come right up. This gray part. Disconnect. Followed by the alternator, the power steering pump, and the air conditioner. And by the way, guys, this clip is actually not as complicated as it seems. When you just pull this back, you just have to simply press on this tab and it springs back. Of course, when it's connected, you gotta push this back manually. But and before I go too far too, we're gonna have to undo this bolt right here. It's a 12mm bolt. 12mm bolt here to loosen off the tension on this belt. And then from there, there's gonna be a couple more bolts down below. And a couple of brackets. Bolts on the brackets over here, and that's how we're going to undo that. Remove the cover here. Again, another cover that I have a hard time with. So that's another 12mm bolt. And we're just going to take this wire and tuck it up under here somewhere. But by the way, if I didn't mention this either, I have a link in the video description as well regarding the previous attempts of me repairing this particular car. If you guys want to take a look at that, it'll be there. Okay, so now we've got all that gone, and we've got our AC compressor loose here. Everything's unbolted. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 big bolts that are holding that thing in place. And something too, you guys probably might not know, some of you probably do, but the belt that holds this in place, this guy right here, is actually a stretch to fit belt. So it's actually under quite a bit of tension, when you take that off, so this is going to want to spring forward, so be careful for that. And for now, because I'm not opening up this AC system, the AC works, I want to keep it that way. And I also don't want to crimp these lines more than I have to. We are going to have to kind of take this over here and maybe plop it over top of the fuse box later to get the motor out, but that's going to be for a short period of time. For now, we're just going to leave it sitting where it is, and we're going to move on to the next thing. Okay, so it's the next day here, and we're going to carry on, leaving where I left off. The next thing I'm going to want to take off is the top engine mount over here, and right back down below is our starter. So we're going to take those two things out. Starter's out, the rear engine mount is out. Before we get too far, we got to take off this ground, and we're going to undo these two connectors here because they stay with the exhaust. This is always difficult to do when you're holding a camera, but you get the idea. So these two have to come out. So we're looking pretty good on top here. And then next we're going to need to remove these two fans, 1 and 2, but of course it's going to be much easier to do with the rad hose out of the way, which means I got to drain the water, and that's always fun. So makes a mess every time, but I've got a drain pan down below. I'm going to remove the lower rad hose nice and slow, and hopefully little bit by little bit I'll fill up my drain pan and fill up my old pails and carry on. Come on, though. No mess, please. Oh, here she goes. Oh, a little bit of a mess. Not that bad. Okay, so since I'm underneath the car here, I decided it's actually easier to just remove the entire rad and give us a little bit more room in the front rather than removing just the fans. So we have two things extra to make this really happen. These two cooler lines, which you can tell I've got a tie wrap on this end of the line. I have another one over here, so I can identify which one's which. And then we have the fan connector on one side here. There's going to be one on the opposite side, and then from the top, all we need to do at that point is remove bracket here, bracket there, and the rad should come right out. As you can tell, without the radiator in place, it gives us a lot more space up front. Fans are out of the way as well, so you don't need to do this next step. But because I'm going to be tearing this engine apart on the second part of my video, I'm going to remove the intake. Mainly because right back here behind the throttle body there's a cover, and that's what you need to have access to in order to undo your 4 bolts from your flex plate to the torque converter. Once that's done, then we can carry on by dropping the oil, and we're going to start undoing the bolts for the bell housing. But like I said, before we do any of that, I'm going to remove the intake, and for that you're going to have 4 bolts on each side, 2 per intake runner, and probably a bunch of connectors. So just be aware when you're taking this apart, you're going to have to also undo, we're going to have to undo this fuel line, which I found a neat trick, guys. So you can go buy the tool, which the tool works really well to undo these special connectors at either end, or you can simply, in this case, undo it right here, or here, with a Phillips screwdriver. Does the same for me. Okay, so the intake manifold is off. There's about 9 sensors, if I counted them all correctly. 9, let's say 10 sensors possibly to unplug. So I mean, kind of see them everywhere. A couple of over here on the head. There's some more over here. One of them down right but here. This one was hard to find. It was tucked right underneath the throttle body, so watch out for it. And also, by the way, remember that ground wire I had asked you to remove? Yeah, that's completely unnecessary because we're not even, this is connected to the transmission rather than the engine, so you can disregard that. Sorry about that. Now, the next thing I'm going to be doing on the top here, disconnecting the cooling lines for the heater core, and then we're going to move on to the bottom side where we're going to undo the exhaust and the, well, actually, sorry, there's still a few things on top here. We're going to do the bell housing bolts in the top. Then we'll go to the bottom, do the exhaust and the manifold, or not the manifold, but the engine mounts. One at the other end. Do that now if you didn't do that. Saves you a lot of frustration later. Also, if you noticed, I've got old pair of gloves in here and some rags down the intakes here. You don't want anything falling in those when you're rotating it. And I'm getting ahead of myself here too, because I mentioned taking out the bell housing bolts, but before we can do that, we're going to take off this cover here, and right back here is where we have our flex plate, and we're going to rotate the crankshaft with, hold on here, with our 22 mil socket. And a big long bar. We're going to rotate the engine right to where we can see one of these bolts. So either which way. There we go. There's the one. Now these bolts are actually quite short, and you want to make sure, if you're worried about dropping it, not a huge deal right now because we're taking the engine out, but if you're worried about dropping it, you might want to stuff a rag somewhere down in that cavity there. And there's the first one. That's it, guys. This is just 4 of these bolts that hold all the power from the engine to the torque converter. It amazes me, but this is what it is. 4 of these little guys. Now we can start taking apart the bell housing bolts. Something I forgot to mention, guys, is this really awkward placement of the cord for your block heater. Now, I live in Northern Ontario, Canada, so we need these kind of things for our vehicles, and it's just a really terrible place to put it, right near the exhaust. So I unclip it at the engine here so I can leave the rest of the wire hanging in the chassis. But don't forget to undo it if you have it. Almost there. Everything's undone. Now we're ready to hook up the engine to the cherry picker. By the way, this is a handmade tool that I just made in a couple of videos ago. I'll link that description down below. But this is a load leveler, so simply by turning the end here, let me see if I can show you guys. If I hook up my impact to the bottom, it slides the load one way or the other, and that's going to make it easier to take the engine out, because I've seen it in the past where if you don't have these hooked up just right, there's the actual bottom 2 bolts are not bolts on the bell housing, they're actually studs, and they become really difficult to pull out because you're putting pressure on them. So you have to pull it out vertically for about 3-4 inches, then you can pick it up straight out. So anyways, check out the description. Let's try it and see how it works first. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. Drum roll. We're going to try and take this thing out. Everything's hooked up. I've got it secured as best as I can. I'm sure I'm going to hear some comments about the structural integrity of some of these bolts, but we're going to go nice and slow and see how my tool works. So for this one here, I'm going to leave the camera rolling. everything comes up here. Make use of my load leveler. See if I can get it to come off. No one said this part was easy. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm transferring the load to the back. Now we're definitely on the engine mounts. It's just a matter of getting it to wheelie free. That seems to be helping. But something's holding me. Ha! We got it. Now we just need to get rid of the exhaust. It's kind of holding me up. I know. And it's free. And of course, we're getting caught up with the ground wire. There we go. That was a struggle. Making sure everything else is free. No funny business anywhere. Oh, we have two O2 connectors that I forgot to mention. Those are going to be a 10 millimeter. I'm also going to need my coolant. So there you have it. After you undo those two O2 connectors, engine comes out. And there it is. It's out. She's hanging. So everything's good. This is going to be the end of this video. My tool worked out really well. Changing the engine load, being able to articulate the engine forward to back is really nice. Now from here, I'm going to drain the engine oil, check out what that's all like. But that's going to be in my next series of videos. So make sure you take a look at those. They're going to be in the description down below. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this.